Hello and welcome to ET Brand Equity presents The Big Leap, powered by CleverTap, an exclusive chat show featuring pioneers from India's 12 largest and fastest growing brands. I'm your host Gautam Srinivasan, and during these conversations, we'll bring you an inside look into the growth stories and success mantras of businesses that have taken a big leap. Well, today's story is about a brand that has been at the helm of building the quick commerce category from scratch. From being a WhatsApp service in 2014 to emerging as a key player in this segment, Dunzo has come a long way since its inception. With a presence in 8 cities, Dunzo has changed the way people move things, how they shop, and access their city. So, would you like to know how they are building this ecosystem and how they are adding loyal customers and retaining them? Well, then join us for this wide-ranging conversation with Kabir Biswas, CEO and co-founder of Dunzo, and Mrunmay O, Vice President for Category and Growth at Dunzo. Kabir, Mrunmay, thank you so much for joining us. Looking forward to discovering more about the Dunzo growth story and retention story. But any story has an inception, has a beginning. So let's start with that. Kabir, involved a lot of moving around, I would say. When it started as a service, when Dunzo started as a service, it was a WhatsApp group. You were personally making deliveries. Any highlights from those days, any memories from those days that you recall, which kind of shaped your thinking about how you are approaching your business?
Thank you so much for having us, first and foremost. My number one thing that I remember from that period, and I think that we use even every day today, is two things. One is consumers are willing to go ahead and give up a lot of their personal space for convenience. It's a misnomer that customers are very guarded, etc., etc. It isn't. If you can offer convenience, I think customers will go out of their way to be able to get it from you.
But how strong was this idea in your opinion? Because did you imagine you are going to become this behemoth in this 24/7 ecosystem?
No, I started it off as just because I wanted to solve my own problem. I was like, because it started off on WhatsApp, literally telling 3 people in Bangalore that, hey, there's this idea that hasn't left my mind for nearly 18 months. I've been traveling around the country, and I finally settled in Bangalore because great weather. And
Today notwithstanding.
Today not, but that's for you. Right? And I was like, I told 3 people that just send me whatever you want me to get done. Right? And I will run it down. You don't have to worry about it. And I think this was literally like a WhatsApp number that people would text and say, hey, can you pick up my dry cleaning, or can you actually just from the store get my groceries? And that's literally how it started. Very tentatively, people would message, right? And we would be like, okay, we'll get it done. And that's where the name comes from, Dunzo. Right? We just, I think, and then the second thing, which is, I think the number one way to retain customers is to make them thrilled about every transaction.
I would agree with that because I used your service pretty late, and I was a bit apprehensive because I had to send something to someone and somebody said, just Dunzo it. I was like, okay, let me do it and see. It was done efficiently with no problems, and I was like, okay, I should have approached this service.
See, both the things
earlier.
True. You're willing to let go of your comfort zone for convenience, and if you go ahead and deliver a great experience, you retain customers.
That's actually a great part of retention. That initial wonder moment that you create, that it actually works, is what defines that retention. We'll expand on that. We'll expand on that.
But just at that point, the only thing that we did was, and something that we even do today, is just obsess till the point of being painful as to how can you go ahead and make sure that every transaction for a customer runs in the most spectacular fashion possible. Good enough isn't good enough. Right?
Ordinary is not the
bar, right? It has to run in a spectacular fashion for customers to find it brag-worthy, right? And so we just kept doing that on WhatsApp. I remember in 3 months it just took off. Like people just told each other about this WhatsApp number, and we got like 10,000 customers. And at which point I was like, okay, we've got to do something about this, right? There wasn't a plan to go ahead and say that, can you actually build a really large delivery network? There wasn't a plan that, it will become a really large retail business at that point. But over the last 5 years, I think that's really the 2 things that we have uncovered. Convenience is 2 big things for Indian customers. One is you need to be able to enable what you call quick deliveries. And then the opportunity to be able to create categories on top of that. So people should be able to buy stuff. And one of the biggest things that people really care about is buying that daily and weekly essentials, which is what's really become
It's a
quick
high
commerce.
frequency use
It's a high
case which you are
frequency
looking
use
at.
case.
All right, I'll get you to expand on all those points, but I'll quickly get a history lesson from Mrunmayee as well, because you come from an extensive stint at the Aditya Birla Group before you joined Dunzo, I think just about 2 years ago. So, what lessons were you looking to apply from your broader retail experience, the rough and tumble there, to this quick commerce space?
So I joined Dunzo after 8 years in the Aditya Birla Group, right? Of which a lot of time was actually spent in the retail space. When I joined Dunzo, we were still not Dunzo Daily. So we didn't have our own inventory-led commerce model. But largely what I had learned then, and which still stays true now, is the way users buy, and like you mentioned, the high frequency daily, weekly essentials hasn't really changed over generations. Like how our generations in the past have actually bought what they used to buy, be it fruits and vegetables, the milk deliveries, running out of like tea, coffee, harpic in the middle of the day, what they buy during seasonal and festive actually hasn't changed. And that learning from the last 8 years that I had spent in retail is something that I knew I could bring here and actually create a really frictionless experience where users who have a habit of buying that, how do you kind of create that experience on Dunzo Daily or on Dunzo for them to keep coming back again and again, because it's finally a high frequency use case. It is not that use case where you go walk into a large format retail store in the start of the month and buy what you want to buy for the entire month. So that was one really large learning. I think the other part that really is very unique to the retail ecosystem, which we wanted to bring in here, is the number of external stakeholders that we work with, be it brands, be it our partners, be it our warehousing partners and all of them. And it has to build an ecosystem and a really scalable and a sustainable, profitable model for all of them. And everyone needs to see the same growth. And to be able to actually bring that learning into Dunzo, which at that point of time was largely a marketplace-based ecosystem. I think these two were key learnings that I came in with, which I thought I could bring to the table. Actually, I came in with a lot less expectations than that. I came to explore and experiment and see how the startup ecosystem actually was working.
It's been more than 2 years, so something is
Yeah.
working. But it's interesting to see how this narrative has also shifted, right? Because whenever the stories of, say, big retailers and how they're going to drive up mom and pop stores came out, the assumption was this is going to happen. But it's, if you use a Star Wars reference, the big retailers were the Empire Strikes Back, and the small retailers were the Return of the Jedi, with all these companies, these enablers like you, putting them up in the equation. So on that note, while it's a grand plan, what's interesting is that you've had a slow and steady approach to it. It's not blazing, let's buy everything out and expand into 50, 70 cities. It's been a slow and measured approach. So, what was it, why was that, the approach that you took, and what is it from the experience in Bangalore where you're highly successful? What are some of the key lessons from there that you will look to apply to other markets that you expand?
Super. So now we are in about 8 odd cities, right? I think our Bangalore is of course the number 1 city, but the other 3 come very close to in the same size. And I think they have grown very quickly and at a rate that's actually surprised us. And I think it's because we've been able to create a playbook out of Bangalore that we are now able to replicate everywhere, right?
Some highlights from that playbook you could share?
Obsessive.
Non-confidential information.
No, I think it's there are 2 real parts to this, right? One is how do you run your delivery network, and how do you make sure that the merchants on the platform and the stores that exist are actually equipped to go ahead and handle customer demand really well. Right? And so I think we've been able to do both of those from a supply perspective really well, and create a playbook that's actually replicable. But quickly coming to the slow and steady part of this, I think it's the nature of how we believe this category will get created. Right? There is massive value in compounding. Right? And I think if you really want to be able to be a high ROI business in the long run, you want to be able to make sure that you are unlocking every piece of the puzzle one step at a time. If you try and unlock 10 at the same time, you lose money at all 10 together. Right? And everybody, I think, has their own philosophy of how they want to build businesses. And right or wrong, I don't think there's any answer out there. But our philosophy is very much saying, hey, let's go ahead and build slowly and steadily. And every time we go do something, it has to have a reason to win. or a right to win, and we should be able to execute at the top-notchest possible level.
But as you evolve in that, if you look at it as a connecting the dots, as you evolve, how do you learn to drive, say, consumer retention and consumer habits? Because during the pandemic, you pivoted from concierge services to, the high frequency use cases of food and grocery, which constitutes now, I think, almost 85% of your business, and you then transition to Dunzo Daily. So in these pivots that you have taken, what have been the lessons learned when it comes to driving consumer habit formation and consumer retention?
Super. So I think the shift during COVID happened by our consumers, right? Because so we were in two big categories. One was package delivery, and the other one was buying from local stores. Clearly, the most important need during the pandemic became buying from local stores, and we actually became an essential commodity or an essential service in every city that we were present in, right? And so what that did was, for a really large set of customers, they got introduced to a digital-first transaction for their daily and weekly commodities or essentials via Dunzo. And I think that really then proved out what the model should look like for us, right? So that was an organic change. I don't think it was as intentional as we wanted it to be. We would have done it much more gradually, but the pandemic just made it happen in like 60 days time, right? And so we just consider it to be a lucky break.
And a series of fortunate and unfortunate
Absolutely.
events.
Should call it for what it is, right? But I think the learnings from that are broadly around three areas, right? One is when we actually launch a new geography, very important that our selection and our store placement is done really well. So you cannot for a second, like you have you have some margin of error with evolving the selection, but it's important to go ahead and get your first pass at it right. As close to as what customers want frequently enough. The delivery network has to be really well trained and capable of being able to handle demand peaks because that's a reality in this business, right? And then with every customer that you acquire, I think it's important to go ahead and acquire them with the right intent, with the right construct from an economics perspective, so that when they actually go ahead and beyond the first 2 or 3 transactions, when you're really creating behavior for them, we see that after 3 transactions, the behavior really sets in. But the job of the platform is to make sure that you're really going ahead and progressing them through the funnel. Those 3 transactions, you need to be able to really, really carefully go ahead and curate for them. So yeah, there are lots of these small things.
It's the
things
initial
that
hook which gets them,
Absolutely.
using. Fantastic. Nirmal, let me bring you in to discuss that in a bit more detail, especially the customer conversations part, because it's a balance for the company, right? You provide as many categories as possible, but somewhere it can get too much, it can result in other issues. So how did your customer conversations, kind of enable you to synergize categories for Dunzo Daily, which made your inventory-led model more attractive and efficient, a win-win for both you and the company?
So I think I'll answer this in 2 parts. The first part being largely how do we define which categories to start off from, largely depends on our tenure in that geography, right? So are you in a phase when you're rapidly acquiring customers and then the kind of selection that you would provide them, something that is really, really open from a trial perspective, versus how do you then start increasing the number of categories that they transact on, and these categories need to be high frequency categories. Because again, it's an inventory owned model, right? An inventory led model, and you can do a very large selection or a very small selection, and you have to still get that balance right. And depending on our age in that geography, and when I say age, it's not only the number of days, months, and I would not even a year because it is that old in every geography, but also the age of the users that we have acquired in that geography, right? So that actually is something that we do very, very with a lot of rigor. Every week we talk to our customers, know what it is that they continue to buy from other sources online and offline, and try to introduce categories to ensure that we have the right synergy, right? And from an attractive perspective, like I mentioned, keep it as frictionless as possible. So if there are decision-making inputs that a user has when they are buying anything, is largely around price, quality, and selection, right? So ensuring that that price is affordable, competitive, ensuring that the quality that they get every single time is right, and ensuring that the experience to shop and get the product that they want through the right search relevance, be it surfacing the right products based on the tenure of the user and what their shopping intent might be, time of day, all of that is extremely important in ensuring that it's both attractive as well as affordable with the right categories that we are actually showing.
And to expand to that, from a marketing perspective, like you've explained from the business side of things, from a marketing perspective, what are the yardsticks that you are keeping to kind of determine the optimum level of engagement to convert users, in a sense, into fans? And to add to that, I also want to understand, companies are scaling. Let's say Dunzo scales exponentially, but the issue is when you experiment to see what works and what doesn't, it takes a certain amount of time. So how do you manage that? You're scaling up exponentially, yet you want to quickly test and see what works and what doesn't. So how do you reconcile both sides? So two-part question. The first, of course, on the retention side, and then on the experimentation side.
So how we actually define engagement, and we actually divide it into two parts. One is very conversion-led engagement, right, which is dependent on offers, discounts, showing the right products, all of that. And then you have to also balance it in terms of engagement where you're actually talking to your users, sharing information, statistics, moment marketing, using very specific insights like watching FIFA in the night or cricket and stuff like that, and also email, right? So keep it really, really low clutter, keep it extremely relevant, keep it segmented to the right cohorts based on what their past purchases look like, based on what is the kind of time of day, week of day that they transact on the most. Like you see users who have more affinity to respond on a Saturday versus a Wednesday and stuff like that. So you ensure all of that to keep this engagement at an optimum level, to balance between both conversion and ensuring that you're not driving clutter. And to the second question on the experimentation. So experimentation is like a core DNA at Dunzo, right? So we actually have dedicated teams that work on experimentation. If there is a valid hypothesis that is backed by a certain amount of data, we are all for going out and testing it.
But the timing issue?
And so while we might say timing, right, it's a high frequency use case. So a high frequency use case gives you enough reads between 3 to 4 weeks on at least a core set of users where you can start deriving insights if directionally this is working or not, and keep tweaking it accordingly and then scaling it really fast, right? So it's not one of those...
it's the T20 of engagement. It's not a test.
Right? So, well put. But yeah, so that's exactly how we actually look at experimentation. Keep the sanctity of the experiment, keep the sanctity of the execution, ensuring that you've selected a right mix of users to test it on so that you get a larger read, and at the same time experiment really fast. So giving a 4 to 8 weeks for an experiment, I don't think is that long enough, and if you don't do it for that long, then it's not worthy enough. So
Fair point. But that's an interesting viewpoint, because when it comes to a high frequency use case, the timeline also shortens exponentially, which enables you to experiment with the time that you have while scaling up rapidly. But one point that when I mentioned, and Kabir, I'll get you to comment on that, which is discounts. How necessary are discounts to keep users coming back to Dunzo, in your opinion? Because unit economics finally, at least now, is a broad conversation among startups. So when we look at it from that perspective, right, when say expansion happens in non-metro areas, which are very value conscious and who at the end of the day might prefer a free delivery. So keeping that in mind, how important are discounts? Is it just temporary? You're building your value proposition to such a level that after this phase of discounts happens, customers will still stick with you?
There are two parts to this I'm going to address, especially because the tier 2 thing that you mentioned, right? So I think it's important to be able to get customers to activate. It seems like at scale in India, customers will activate not because of the fact that we provide them an extraordinary experience, but because they find the trial to be cheaper than what the other transaction mediums might look like. That's the reason to convert at scale, right? To try, give you trial or give you their what you call mind share. But I think it's very important to go ahead and get them into the funnel, get them to those 3 transactions, and then be able to go ahead and reset them into what the steady state will look like for them. Right? It's the same way that when you actually call up a local store and they tell you that, hey, if you're ordering 1 strip of Saradon, they'll come in 45 minutes to an hour. Or if you're ordering like a big order, then you'll be like, aur kuch order kar lo, then you'll get the item much faster.
If you're on the ICU, all the medicines delivered are free.
Correct. So the offline parallels actually do play out in something like this, right? And so that's really how we think about discounts. It's important from a trial perspective, right, for customers to be able to start coming onto the platform and start learning about what the category does for them, to give us a little bit of mindshare. And then post the second or a third transaction, try and set them into a what you call consistent behavior, which is going to be unit economics worthy for us, right? It does not mean that in steady state there aren't discounts. There are a few, but those look very similar to what you would see in any other place, right?
So you need to do the bread and butter discounting, but you also need to look at the value proposition.
Correct. So the value prop is with what you call bread and butter discounting. But I think in the category though, we are learning that the pricing is a lot more convenience priced than deep discounting.
That's true. It's a customer pain point, right? I need to get this delivered somehow. I think at that point in time, the customer is not going to end up thinking, oh, should I pay 100 or versus 75? For 100,
So
I get a
it's
service.
not the deep discounting nature, but it is a convenience price thing, which is, so a customer has an expectation of what that basket should be. You need to be in the ballpark of that expectation.
As long as you know the ballpark, you're sorted.
Yeah, I think you're good in the long run. Just coming to that small comment on tier 2, etc. Right? We actually fundamentally believe that there is a density question in this business that needs to be addressed, and it's addressed sequentially to understand where you will find density. You might not find it everywhere. We actually have a hypothesis that at scale, and by scale I mean like 75, 100 million customers in the country, not 10, 15, right? Most likely a slower and a cheaper value proposition is going to be much more powerful than an expensive and a quick one. Right, and that's actually what's gone ahead and nudged us in building a slower proposition also.
But that's still same day delivery, I presume.
It seems same day, but I'll be honest, the economics of that look very similar to what any other format of delivery might look like. We're able to bring down the cost of say 75-minute delivery down to really what a next day delivery, etc. might cost look like, because of the amount of density that we are able to pull into the same
conflict with your value prop then? Because for high frequency use case, the expectation is at least, okay, 2-3 hours I'm willing to wait.
That's
for
why I said 75 minutes.
75
Correct.
minutes.
So I'm saying our worst case scenario is 75 minutes.
That's
but
your worst
we are
case.
realizing that the slower and cheaper value prop is going to be powerful and most likely more powerful in the long run than the pricier and the faster one. Because a really large part of the urban middle income groups in India, right, they don't necessarily know how to value time. Right, and so they're not willing to pay that 30, 40 rupees or 25 rupees of convenience. And so for them to be able to get a very standardized form of experience which has high selection, high availability, high quality, and the right price, their shopping machines are okay to come in 60, 75 minutes.
But again, it's a factor of customer cohorts. There will be some who will
Different
say,
cohorts
I want it in 10 minutes and I will pay for it.
Which is why I said not the 10, 15 million customers, but
for
the 50,
the
60
mass
million
110.
customers.
All
Absolutely.
right. On that note, I also want to bring this point of your delivery partners. You have a 75,000 strong delivery partner ecosystem. What are you doing to retain their loyalty? Because it's a hyper competitive landscape. They could be with you one day, off to next. So some secrets there as to how you retain your delivery partners, and also how do you look at, say, building a better delivery partner customer ecosystem? Again, from some of the experiences which my friends have gone through, where they say, I only go with this person. If I'm using the service, I make it a point because that person is usually in charge of the area, so therefore comes, and there's a relationship built of assurance. If this person has come, I know my service is going to get delivered. So anything that you're doing there to build customer partner engagement?
Super. So this was very early, I think in our first year when we were functioning, right? And I think somebody had mentioned this, and this was based upon one of the global gig economy, what you call businesses doing it. And they put it interesting. They were like, delivery partner NPS drives user NPS. And it's not the reverse, right? So you need to be able to make sure that your delivery partners are really happy. Now, what drives happiness for them, right? For them, I think earnings is really important. Right, you need to be able to make sure that the earnings at any point don't drop off below a cliff, right? So when you're actually making large changes on the platform or large product changes, etc., it's extremely important that you go ahead and pay attention to what their final earnings are going to look like, rather than just what your efficiency looks like. Because if the partners this drops, it's going to show up in their behavior, etc. The second one is, I think, communication. I think it just seems a little what you call simplistic in nature, but it's the exact opposite.
But how do you do it differently? Because oftentimes, when that relationship builds, it's ironic that a partner that would actually complain about the company to the customer, saying, I wish they did these things so that our interaction would be easier. How do you address that?
I think the delivery partner communication framework is like a whole thing, by the way. You need to be able to do stuff from training. You need to be able to do stuff from making sure that you show up on a bad day for them. You show up for their families. You actually go ahead and over communicate changes. I I think even in cities, even now, there are pockets where we go ahead and do breakfast meets for our delivery partners, saying, hey, like everybody come, we'll go ahead and catch up for breakfast, right? And it's them, what you call, feeling a lot more involved and closer to the company, right? Even when they are what you call gig workers. So second part of communication is just that you need to be able to open up a channel of communication that they believe is going to get them heard, right? Till the point that in Bangalore today, I must still have like at least 30 delivery partners reach out to me every day, right? Saying, hey, this happened. And sometimes it's not really an issue also, but like just really, what happened. And so it's really to make sure that, every time they say something, it is heard. So earnings was first, communication was second. And the third one is, I think you need to be able to make sure that, and this is where I think for us, earnings and categories comes really closely this, right? For us to make our economics work, we need to be able to play in a couple of categories which tend to complement with each other, right? And so the reasons why we have picked the categories that we have picked to play in, right, which is express package delivery as well as this, is it allows us to go ahead and allow for high earnings for our delivery partners while our economics actually looking good. Because they tend to go ahead and their peaks and troughs tend to go ahead and not overlap. So they tend to go ahead and create a very high utilization curve for our delivery partners.
That actually nicely segues to my next question to you, Mrinay, which is finding the right balance, right? Because your average delivery times are around 19 to 20 minutes. And as Kabir has said, 75 minutes is the worst case scenario. But as your SKUs keep building up, that is going to increase delivery times as well. So how do you arrive at that right balance between assortment, serviceability, and speed to make sure that the appeal for Dunzo still remains for customers?
So I think this balance itself is a really hard one to get right. And I don't think it is one formula that's going to fit every city or in fact every geo, because what is important in the hierarchy of selection, price, quality and speed and serviceability is like table stakes. Like you have to be serviceable, you have to be reliable from a service perspective. But amongst these, what really is important for the customers that you have acquired in a certain city or geo is actually going to play out from there, right? So some of the things that we potentially then look at is providing this delivery models that are actually allowing same users at different use cases to get a 10-minute delivery at a higher price or a 45-minute delivery at a lower delivery fee with a larger selection. So we actually give the users the option to purchase based on the use case that they want. So maid walks into your house and you don't have milk to get tea made, that's something you need 10 minutes in. But you wanted something 3 hours later and you're okay to wait, but you need a larger selection because at that time you're topping up your pantry. And we actually give users that choice to make by actually providing these delivery options as well as the larger selection.
And that's a clever way to approach it, because
price
you're giving the
at least.
flexibility and at the same time you're maintaining the balance there.
And actually our like really, really high frequency, really core users do tend to use both equally, depending on their use cases, right? Kids going off to school, you need milk, you need ID better in the morning, it's much faster. Something in the evening, getting stationery is much later, and that's fine.
Kabir, understanding converting adversity to opportunity. Some organizations do it well, some do it very well, and some don't do it very well. So your perspective, how does Dunzo do it? If there's a customer problem, how do you make it into a customer joy?
Super. So I think a bunch of the early team members all learned what Dunzo meant by actually taking a lot of support tickets, right, and doing deliveries themselves. And I think as much as we try, right, it's never going to be 100% perfect orders. It's always going to be 99.6, right? And there are going to be these small set of transactions which are hard to go ahead and what you call always get spot on. In those cases, sure, you can go ahead and, like there are ways that you can go ahead and, pacify the customer, try and be very proactive about it. I think again, communication over there really helps. If you are over communicating that, hey, this is the issue, right? Before they have placed an order, at the point of placing the order, and after they have placed the order, I think customers are very kind, by the way. I think it's one of those things that I think you realize that customers are actually inherently very kind if you're willing to inform them. But yeah, like I think.
But you have to show a human.
You have to show a very human, empathetic face around it, right? And that's something that you need to be able to build across your product and your teams, right? So your online teams as well as your product needs to be extremely empathetic to the fact that if something's going off, you go ahead and actually acknowledge it and communicate to customers.
And fixing it, what do you do then?
go back and RCA everything, right? Like, just every time something goes wrong, what was the actual root cause, and then go fix the root cause, right? Because that's really the thing that will go ahead and make sure it doesn't happen again. Of course, once in a while, customers get very irate, right? And I think there's no real way to just give them like another coupon to be able to solve it. It just sounds like a really transactional way to solve the problem. So that's not really the end goal. It's a very short-term thing, right? I think being able to go make sure that the problem doesn't happen again, and just ensuring that you are able to build empathy in the product and the teams that actually interact with them, we believe is a much what you call better way to
It's a
solve
more
it in the long
robust,
run.
at least action from a consumer's perspective that, hey, at least these complaints are working and it's not the same old templated communication that you get. And speaking of that, the importance of communication, of course, can't be underscored any more than, when we look at retention. But it's also a balance of contextual and non-contextual communication because fatigue would set in. So I want to understand how Dunzo does it.
Right. So in terms of communication, actually our largest channel, which actually generates the most amount of traffic on our user app, especially from our existing users, is actually push notifications, right? And all of those are actually powered through CleverTap. It is a substantial amount, good double-digit number in terms of the traffic it generates. And we do measure our relevance in terms of whether we want to be contextual, non-contextual, with what kind of user, with the kind of shopping intent, or with the kind of mission that they're coming onto the app at that point of time. Most of this happens through our in-app, SDKs that we have embedded through CleverTap, as well as our backend integrations, just to understand what has this user bought in the past, when has that user bought it, at what frequency do they buy it, which location do they typically order from, right? A lot of our users actually order from multiple locations. And knowing at this point of time where could that user be and what could that user be buying, and ensuring that relevance, all of this actually helps us ensure that our contextual and non-contextual communication is well balanced to drive business value, and extremely automated, completely automated through CleverTap today. And
any particular use case that you think is memorable, where some of the data which came through from CleverTap made you think, oh, maybe we were understanding users the wrong way, and maybe this is the way we should approach communication with them? Any particular use case, any particular highlight that you think?
So there are multiple such use cases, largely actually driven across three different things. One being around upselling and cross-selling, right? So what are the kind of users who, based on their previous purchases, we know are going to try out premium categories, premium brands within a category, and ensuring that we're able to upsell and cross-sell correctly, right? So even within a category, so if a user is buying some chocolates that are, say, imported, you know that this user is probably also going to buy a personal care product, which is not a Head and Shoulder shampoo, but something that is more expensive and more premium. And being able to use that data effectively has really helped us to ensure that we are able to go ahead and drive this traffic to better conversion, and then increase the wallet share that we are able to generate from this user, right? So
it enables you to connect the dots where earlier you couldn't see them.
Correct. And also then there are users that it's raining. Rains is one of the time where we see the highest demand, because users are not going to go out, they are going to need to still order their essentials that they need. And depending on what kind of serviceability that we are able to provide them at that time, because we may also have some restrictions at that point of time, being able to actually see, okay, what's this user the last time when they ordered, at this point of time, what did they buy, and is this user going to come back if I nudge them to an incentive, or nudge them to the use case that may be more relevant at this point of time for them. A Friday evening communication is very different from a Saturday morning communication for the same user. Saturdays could probably be more meat and eggs led, and Friday could be more snacks led, right? So a lot of this is actually powered completely through our automated journeys and our data that we have been able to create along with the CleverTap team. So
All right, that's fascinating to see how things work, how the nuts and bolts of retention take place. But speaking of nuts and bolts, I also want to understand from an organization perspective how the structure works, especially in terms of being proactive for consumer engagement, because these days organizations are also building themselves around that CX aspect, customer first aspect. So I'll get the organization view from you and the marketing organization view from you. What's your take on this, Kabir, first?
So we actually, from an org perspective, think about it very simply as demand generation and supply or supply chain, right? Where there is this whole idea of customers, what they want to buy, how they want to be able to buy, when will they come to buy, and what should we go ahead and tell them at those points of time, which combines all the three of them. Because who the customer is, what the customer is, what do they want to buy, and where are we keeping them, all of those three things together come to how do we communicate, how do we onboard and stuff like that. So that's really the entire category of demand generation, right? So movement team leads the whole thing on that, right? Which is really what will we sell as well as who it will be sold to and how it will get sold to, right? And then comes the whole idea of how do we actually what you call fulfill those transactions, which has its own aspect of a supply chain. Then how do we go ahead and run our stores? Then how do we go ahead and make sure that we have enough delivery partners who are actually going ahead and always being available to what our demand plans look like, right? So that's the largest two parts of the organization, right? Then of course there is what you call a part that is making sure that every time we do have a small support ticket, it is getting handled in a fashion, right? And then everything else after that.
So a balance of strategic and tactical. It's not strategic versus tactical.
I don't think you can, right? I think it needs to be able to cater to both of them at the same time.
Fair point. Remind to expand on some of the points which Kabir mentioned from a marketing org perspective. How are you structured to be proactive rather than reactive?
I think proactive from a perspective that so our entire organization on the demand side, like Kabir mentioned, is divided also between like a growth team as well as a entire category selection pricing sort of team, right? And it's the category selection and pricing sort of team that brings in the signals on what a user is going to buy when based on our shopping missions, right? So that New Year's is going to come in and what is it that people are going to buy. So what are the kind of brands, what are the kind of products that are going to be selling? At the same time, it's the growth team that is also going to tell you which kind of geographies and what kind of users are going to come in, what are going to be those peak times of the day. And knowing all of this actually is extremely important, because just getting the demand is not enough, right? Servicing the demand is more important, because till you can get the serviceability and reliability part of it, you're not going to create user delight and create fans out of your product. So most of our planning is actually extremely proactive. The reactive part actually comes in only when we have an imperfect order, right? Because unfortunately, the lead time into servicing an order in such a scenario, until you have the item that the user wants to buy available, is not going to work. And for that to happen, when you move into an inventory-led model, it has to be proactive to be successful. And in that, you do end up taking tactical and strategic decisions, some of which could be saying, in Q1, this is how it's going to look like, versus saying what it's going to look like on the weekend. But potentially, if you want to build this for success, it has to be more proactive than reactive.
All right, that's the inside look at Dunzo. Let's also look at the external view. And I want to bring in a question to you, Kabir, which is how will Dunzo synergize with Reliance Retail, which is one of your largest investors? What does, say, Dunzo stand to gain, whether it's an infrastructure play or something else? What's your view on that?
No, so I think there are a couple of things that are live and in public forums now. I think the first one is for a lot of the product that is actually being what you call shipped to customers, right, or being stocked in these small what you call convenience stores in your neighborhood. That product actually comes from Reliance Retail, right, and it gets bought directly from them, and they are the supply chain that we what you call depend upon, right. So while building a really complex business, one part of the problem actually gets solved because of them, right? You don't have to actually go solve it, right? So that's one part of it. The second one is because of our second part of our business is express package delivery. On that, we have actually now started doing deliveries for JioMart. Right. So we have about 25,000 merchants on the platform right now. And I think adding JioMart as one of our largest customers actually has very strategic value for us. What it does is it allows us to go ahead and ensure serviceability across the country, ensure that delivery partners have enough liquidity in every part of the country. They also have demand when there are what you call lower demand periods at our platform. And so we are able to superimpose both of them and make sure that delivery partners are fully engaged through the day. So those are two things that we are doing very closely.
So you're part of that offline to offline chain,
Yes.
that online to offline chain.
Correct.
That they have. All right. Another aspect is that I think Dunzo for Business joined ONDC as the logistics partner to provide last mile delivery services. Of course, leveraging your 75,000 delivery partners, and you're connecting over, I think, 20,000 merchants to customers. How do you see this move broadly, impacting, say, your D2C play? What are some of the synergistic benefits you see there?
So we think about logistics as a platform, right? You can build use cases on top of it for sure, but the end point of it is going to be it has to function like a platform, right? So
This
today,
is part of your focus from shopping to shipping, as in your
Yes.
shift in focus?
absolutely no. So I think the shipping focus always existed, right? We have gone ahead and added shopping on top of that.
As in more shopping
Correct.
than shipping.
More
Sorry,
shopping
that-
than
just
shipping,
to
right?
clarify.
So I think so we have gone ahead and created this delivery platform that exists across the country now, right? And it's growing on a week-on-week basis based upon the traffic that we see. So how do we really see this, right? So we built this delivery platform and we built two big use cases on top of it. One is people buying their daily and weekly essentials, and people were already shipping packages on top of it. We want to be able to democratize logistics for everybody else, because not all categories are going to get built by us, right? There are going to be people who go ahead and have what you call their businesses that are going to need logistics, and we would want to be able to support that with really low cost infrastructure that our logistics platform brings. And so for us, we think about logistics as a service the same way that you would think about AWS being synonymous to Amazon. Right, where they took their biggest thing on cloud computing and went ahead and made it as AWS. For us, logistics is the biggest one. We have gone ahead and made a tons of a business out of it, right? And that's really the one that we have gone ahead and integrated at ONDC, right? We don't believe that in India you're going to see winner take all markets, what you call play out online on what you call in any fashion. What you're going to see multiple retail formats play out. And what the logistics business allows us to do is to be able to become a participant to each and every form of retail that plays out.
All right, so it's all part of show me the money, and you end up making more money, but you're also on top of the consumer's mind no matter where they go. All right, as we look to wrap up the conversation, just a few end points to kind of sum things up. When we look at, when I mention show me the money, I'm talking about monetization, right? That's the goal. So I want to understand from you, as Dunzo targets reaching profitability within the next 2 years, how have you tweaked paths for eventual monetization from different consumer cohorts where, say, the maximum ARPU can be leveraged without sort of compromising on contribution margins? So, what are your popular data-driven nudges to this effect?
So I think that is one of our largest North Star metrics, right? To ensure that we are actually able to increase our average revenue per user with a healthy contribution margin. And some of the things that I mentioned earlier from how we have actually integrated with CleverTap are actually exactly inputs into this. So like Kabir mentioned, the first 3 transactions, we want to make consumers really, really thrilled with the transaction they have. And we could probably disproportionately spend on just ensuring that they have no barrier to trial. Once they are locked in, we actually have very, very clear cohorts in terms of how we look at our users based on even the first category that they transact on, hence the next affinity category that they have to transact on, which kind of brands they would transact on from a lookalike from another user. And we actually go through this journey for a user right from the acquisition, track it really, really closely for like about 56 to 75 days, depending on what kind of cohort it is, and ensure that we're able to upsize, upsell, cross-sell, incentivize, just in order to ensure that we're able to increase this revenue per user. At the same time, we also work very, very closely with brands, right? Because brands themselves come with a lot of insights when they launch new products, and they have more deeper understanding of that specific product and the users that buy them and how they could switch consumption. And those insights really help us to segment even the experience on the app for our users in terms of the kind of nudges that we provide to them on a cart page, or the kind of recommendations that we give to them when they look at a search would be very different for you, for me, for some other user, depending on the kind of life cycle or the journey that user is in, what kind of cohort, what kind of past purchase behavior.
That's always the goal, right? Everyone gets a unique sort of look into, or the unique feel and look of the app for their own customized needs. All right, as we look to wrap up this conversation, let's get in some lessons in excellence. Kabir, to all the startup founders who are watching this show, what would you say are the bookmarks from this conversation that they should remember or take away when it comes to this aspect of converting customers into fans? What would you say?
Don't take other people's advice.
Let's not call it advice. Let's call it wisdom.
Both. No, I think for us, I think the first thing that has always rung true and continues to be is you got to build something that people want to go ahead and love, right? Customers are very kind, right? But I think you have to go out of your way to be able to build something that they really, really enjoy using. That's the problem to solve, right? Everything else is secondary to that. Then you do growth dollars, then you do marketing, then you do retention, then let's be smart about everything else, right? But at the core of it all, you have to be able to obsess as to why your customer is going to care about you and love you, right? If you can do that, then I think that's really what we care about.
All right, that's the X factor. Be kind, rewind, never forget you're human, your brand is human, you're catering to humans, so always have that human aspect with you when you look at realizing your big leap ambitions. On that note, we'll conclude this conversation. Kabir Mrunmayee, thank you so much for sharing with us this spectacular growth and retention story of Dunzo. And with that, it's a wrap on ET Brand Equity presents The Big Leap, powered by CleverTap. It's been a fantastic journey of learning from 12 brands the secrets of retention and, of course, the growth and investment stories that have come out. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for being part of this journey. On that note, this is your host, Gautam Srinivasan, signing off. Have a great day.